Hi everyone, now you're watching my channel. All the content I create myself, new videos every day, so don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means a lot. Thanks, bye!
You don't belong here!
You just made a fatal mistake.
She would remember the exact moment later. The way Captain Gerald Harmon raised his arm and pointed at her. Pointed like she was cargo, like she was a problem to be removed, while two Metropolitan Police officers stood at the aircraft door, and the entire cabin held its breath. But that was 8 hours away. First, there was the lounge. The Apex Air Polaris Lounge at JFK operated on a frequency seat of quiet confidence. Leather chairs the color of dark honey, the soft percussion of ceramic on saucer, the hiss of an espresso machine from somewhere behind a partition wall. Dr. Sandra Mitchell sat near the panoramic window overlooking the tarmac, a bottle of still water untouched on the side table beside her, her attention entirely on the tablet balanced across her knees. The screen held the bones of a deal 2 years in the making. She had championed the Sterling Airways merger from the beginning, before it had a name, before it had a number attached to it, when it was still just a conviction she carried into boardrooms and fought to have taken seriously. She was 42 years old and the youngest director on the Apex Air Board. And she had learned early that in rooms like those, you did not wait to be believed, you arrived already certain. So she had built the case methodically, brick by brick, until the numbers spoke for themselves. And now the numbers were signed. Almost 5 papers were waiting in London. She had chosen seat 4B deliberately, business class, not the suite at the front. She had told herself it was research. She wanted to see the premium product as a customer saw it, to feel the gaps between what Apex promised and that was the truth. The fuller truth was that she wanted to earn the seat the same way any other passenger did. No special treatment, no escorts or upgraded menus. Just the experience unfiltered. She was still reading when the boarding announcement came over the terminal speakers. She closed the merger files, stood and smoothed the front of her jacket. Near the gate, the flight crew had gathered in a loose cluster. The captain was easy to identify, tall, silver crew cut. The particular posture of a man who had spent 30 years being the most important person in the room he entered. His name tag read, G. Harmon. He was mid-story, one hand moving through the air. A group of junior crew leaning in around him with the practiced attention of people who knew which way the wind blew. You just have to be firm from the start, he was saying, his voice carrying easily across the ambient noise of the gate. Especially on the transatlantic routes. You give them an inch, they take a mile. Think they own the plane because they paid for a flat bed. Sandra felt something shift in her chest, a small familiar tightening. The comment was vague enough to dismiss. But vagueness was the point, and she had been fluent in that particular language her entire life. She joined the boarding queue. When she reached the gate agent, the woman looked up, and her face opened into a genuine smile. Dr. Mitchell, enjoy your flight. Harmon's eyes moved toward her for less than a second. No recognition, just the quick calibrating sweep of a man, sorting the world into categories he already had names for. Then he turned back to his crew. She stepped through the door and onto the jet bridge. Behind her, she heard him say something to the first officer walking beside him. She didn't catch the words. She caught the tone. The easy, careless dismissal of someone who had never had to choose his words carefully. The Boeing 777 was immaculate inside. She found seat 4B, aisle, forward business cabin, stowed her leather briefcase in the overhead bin and settled in. The seat was good. The lighting was warm. The table unfolded cleanly. She opened the merger documents again and let the numbers pull her in. She told herself the unease she'd felt at the gate was nothing. A routine irritation, background noise. She had been wrong about that before. She would not be wrong about it for long. The boarding process settled into its familiar rhythm. Passengers filed in, arranged themselves and their belongings, negotiated the overhead bins with varying degrees of grace. Sandra kept her eyes on her screen but registered everything, the way the cabin filled, the sounds layering into each other, the particular energy of a long-haul departure. Rachel's the quiet efficiency of someone who had mastered the art of being present with the sensed withouten. Sound She was young, maybe 28 or 29, with a name tag pinned precisely a sensor of her collar. "Good evening, Dr. Mitchell. Can I bring you something before we push back?" "We have champagne, orange juice, water." "Water, please," Sandra said, glancing up. "Thank you, Rachel." Rachel had a good smile, not the professional approximation of warmth, but the real thing. She was gone, and back in under a minute, the water already poured, a folded linen cloth placed neatly on the tray table beside it. Sandra noticed. Small things were the not small thing. They were the data. Captain Harmon's voice came over the intercom a few minutes later, deep resonant, the kind of baritone engineered to communicate absolute authority. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Captain Gerald Harmon, speaking. Welcome stop Hapes Airs, Flight 714, with non-stop service tonight to London Heathrow. We're looking at a flight time of 6 hours and 45 minutes, clear skies end to end. Cabin crew will be coming through shortly to take care of you. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the Apex experience." The speech was standard, but something in the cadence of it, the slight weight on certain words, the particular shade of ownership in how he said, "My cabin crew," made Sandra set her water down for a moment and listen. Then the commotion started 4 rows forward. A man in a rumpled sports coat was attempting to force an oversized roller bag into the bin above row 2. The bag was too wide. He knew it was too wide. The physics were clear. He tried a different angle, then the original angle again, louder this time. Rachel moved immediately, calm and practiced. "Sir, I'm afraid that bag will need to be checked at the gate. We can make sure it's waiting for you at arrivals in London. It'll be completely safe." "No, it'll fit," the man said. He was red-faced now, embarrassed in the way men sometimes are when the world refuses to accommodate their certainty. The cockpit door opened. Harmon came down the aisle with the stride of someone who considered every inch of the aircraft his personal property. He did not look at the man with the bag. His gaze moved past him, scanning, settling. It settled on the overhead bin above Sandra's seat. "Whose bag is this?" he said, pointing. Sandra looked up. "Mine, Captain." Harmon opened the bin. He pulled her leather briefcase out, not carefully, not with any particular urgency, but with the deliberateness of a man who had already decided it was in the wrong place. He held it for a moment, looking at it the way someone looks at a thing that has no right to be where it is. Then he placed it, dropped it really, on the floor at Sandra's feet. The impact was small but audible. "Oh, such! That goes unter self-slinch. The bins are for proper luggage." He turned away without waiting for response. He took the struggling man's bag, repositioned it with a single practiced motion, and closed the bin above row 2. The man sat down quickly, grateful and embarrassed in equal measure. Harmon gave a curt nod, the nod of a man who has solved a problem of his own making, and walked back toward the cockpit. Sandra looked at her briefcase on the floor. Then she looked at the empty space in the bin above her where it had been stored. Rachel appeared almost immediately, her face a careful professional mask overs, something that looked very much like mortification. "Dr. Mitchell, I am so sorry. Please let me take care of that." She lifted the briefcase gently, checked the overhead compartment, and resecured it. "It's fine, Rachel," Sandra said. Her voice was even. She picked up her tablet. Picture numbers were still there waiting for her. She stared at them for a moment without reading. Data point 1. The 777 punched through the low cloud layer over the Atlantic and leveled out at 35,000 feet. And the cabin settled into the long-haul rhythm Sandra knew well. The faint hum of the engines becoming ambient, the gradual darkening of the overhead lights, the choreographed movements of the crew beginning the meal service. Rachel came by with the cart an hour in, composed and pleasant as though the previous hour had not happened. "Dr. Mitchell, for your main course this evening, we have pan-seared salmon with salmon sauce or beef short rib with roasted potatoes. What would you prefer?" "The salmon," Sandra said. "Thank you, Rachel." The presentation, when it arrived, was genuinely impressive. The plate was arranged with care. The glassware was polished. The detail work was exactly what a premium product should be. Sandra cut into the salmon and brought the first piece to her mouth. She set her fork down. It was extraordinarily salty. Not in the way food sometimes runs a little heavy on the seasoning, but fundamentally wrong, the kind of error that happened at the source, in the preparation, before the fish ever boarded the aircraft. She tried another bite, the same. She took a sip of water and looked at the plate for a moment, making the small calculation she had learned to make. Say something or don't. She was here to audit the product, that was the entire point. Silence in the face of a quality control failure was not objectivity, it was abdication. When Rachel came through on the collection pass and asked how everything was, Sandra set down her water glass. Everything has been wonderful, Rachel. Your service has been exactly right. I do want to mention, and please pass this along to catering, the salmon was unusually salty. I don't know if it was just my portion, but it might be something worth flagging. Rachel's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the particular focus of someone taking a note seriously. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Can I bring you the short rib instead, or perhaps a cheese plate? No, thank you. I've had enough. I just wanted you to have the information. I'll make sure it goes in my flight report, Doc Mitchell. Thank you for telling me. That, Sandra expected, was the end of it. She returned to her screen. The merger documents had a rhythm to them, now that she found almost soothing, the comfortable language of due diligence, of things that could be measured and confirmed. She was 15 minutes deep into the Sterling Airways liability analysis when she became aware of a stillness in her peripheral vision, the particular stillness of someone standing over her. She looked up. Harmon was there, arms crossed, weight on his back foot, a look on his face that she had seen before. Not someone's, but in other rooms, on other men, when their authority was questioned by the wrong kind of person. I hear you have a problem with our food, he said. His voice was kept low, but only barely. Sandra set her tablet face down on the tray to table. Captain, I offered some feedback to the flight attendant when she asked. That's feedback, he said. The word landing like small stone dropped into water. My crew is busy enough without handling complaints about airline food. It's not a restaurant. What exactly were you expecting? The man in the row ahead glanced back. The woman across the aisle shifted in her seat. In the window seat, to Sandra's left, a young man named Marcus Webb had very quietly, very casually lifted his phone from the seat pocket in front of him. My feedback was constructive, Sandra said. Her voice was steady. Your tone is not. Something moved through Harmon's face, a tightening, like a system pressurizing. You people, he said, are always looking for something to complain about. Always looking for a voucher, a refund, something for free. Is that what this is? The phrase detonated in the air between them. Soft, almost conversational. That was the thing about those two words, the casualness of them, the practiced ease, the confidence that they would land where they were intended and be absorbed quietly. Sandra felt her spine straighten by degrees. Captain Morrison, she said, and then corrected herself. Captain Harmon. I am not looking for anything free. I am a passenger who gave feedback when asked. What you are doing right now is unprofessional and completely out of line. His face reddened. He leaned in slightly. Out of line? Let me tell you what's out of line. Passengers in seats they clearly can't afford, thinking they have the right to criticize my flight and my crew. I run this aircraft, and on my aircraft we don't have room for entitled disruption. His voice had dropped to a near whisper. One more word, and I will have you restrained for interfering with a flight crew. The word restrained fell through the silence. Rachel stepped forward from the galley entrance, her face colorless. Captain, please. Handle this. Stay out of it, Sarah. He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on Sandra. I don't know how you got this ticket, but your attitude needs a serious adjustment. Sandra looked at him. Her hands were folded on the tray table. Perfectly still. She let several seconds know that silence held correctly was not weakness. Are you finished, Captain? She asked. Her voice was quiet, exact. The temperature of deep water. His jaw tightened. No, I'm not finished. In fact, I think we are done here. When we land in London, you can explain your conduct to the authorities. He turned on his heel and walked back toward the cockpit. The door clicked shut. The cabin held its breath. Then, slowly, the sound of the engines returned. Marcus Webb lowered his phone to his knee, the recording light blinking steadily, and exhaled. The cockpit door sealed itself behind him like a pressure valve closing. For a moment, the cabin breathed, small exhales, the rustle of someone shifting in their seat, a whispered exchange between a couple 3 rows back who had watched the whole thing. Rachel Torres stood at the galley curtain with her hands clasped in front of her. her professional composure doing its level best to hold. Then the intercom chimed. Harmon's voice came over the speakers, and something in it was different. The warm authority of the welcome announcement replaced by something clipped and cold. Ladies and gentlemen, your captain speaking. I want to inform you that we are currently dealing with a situation involving a disruptive passenger in our business class cabin. This individual's behavior has created a challenge to the safety and security of this flight. I have been in contact with our operations center. I am officially putting the individual on notice that any further interference with compliance will be considered interference with the flight crew, which is a federal matter. I am currently evaluating whether it will be necessary to divert this aircraft to Shannon, Ireland, for the purpose of removing the individual in question. Your safety is our priority. I will keep you informed. The words fell into the cabin like something dropped from a height. For a single suspended moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, the heads turned. Not quickly, not dramatically, just the slow, awful pivot of over 200 people looking towards seat 4B. Sandra sat very still. She felt every gaze land on her and settle, felt the weight of the cabin's assumption assembling itself in real time. She was the Harmon had confronted. She was the only person who had said anything. The math was simple, and the math was wrong. A diversion to Shannon. She did the arithmetic quickly. Shannon to London. Another flight, another delay, customs, rebooking. The Sterling Airways signings was scheduled for 10 in the morning. The negotiating team would be in the room. The Sterling lawyers would be in the room. If Apex's board representative arrived 3 hours late or didn't arrive at all, the signal it sent would travel faster than any explanation she could offer. She had fought 2 years for this deal. She was not going to let it unravel at 35,000's mate over a piece of salmon. Daniel Perry appeared at her aisle, his face the color of old paper. He was the lead purser, Harmon's senior crew member, the one who would be required to relay whatever came down from the cockpit. He sat down in the jump seat across from her row and looked at the floor. "Ma'am," he began, "the captain has instructed me to inform you that you are to remain in your seat, that you are not to move through the cabin without permission, and that you are to comply with all crew instructions without further incident." He delivered it like a man reading his own sentence. Sandra looked at him steadily. "Daniel, do you personally believe that I am a threat to the safety of this flight?" His jaw moved. His eyes went sideways. "Ma'am, I'm just conveying the captain's instructions." "I understand that," she said. "That's not what I asked." He didn't answer. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and retreated to the forward galley. Rachel came back a few minutes later, moving carefully, keeping her voice below the ambient sound of the cabin. She crouched beside Sandra's seat, her eyes bright with something that was almost tears. "Dr. Mitchell, I am so sorry. I never, what he did, the things he said. I'm going to file a full report, regardless of anything else. I want you to know that." Sandra put her hand briefly on Rachel's wrist. "This is not your fault. You've been professional from the minute I sat down. I need you to go take care of the other passengers. They're unsettled, and they need to see the crew holding things together." Rachel nodded, steadied herself, and went. Sandra leaned back in her seat. She looked at the window, nothing but black and the faint reflection of the cabin, and the distant suggestion of stars. She thought about what Harmon had done. He hadn't confronted her because he believed she was a safety threat. He had confronted her because she had given feedback he didn't like, and she had failed to shrink when he applied pressure. And those two things together had offended something deep in his sense of how the world was supposed to work. He was now using the full authority of his position, the intercom, the official log, the threat of law enforcement, to correct that offense. He thought he was cornering her. He had no idea what he had given her instead. She closed her eyes. Let the engine hum absorb her. Breathe in. Breathe out. Let him think he had won. Let him log his reports and make his sense calls and feel the comfortable weight of 30 years. Telling him this was a problem he could solve. The battle was not going to happen here in the dark over the Atlantic at an altitude where his word was law. It was going to happen on the ground. In a place where authority was not measured by who held the radio. She was going to wait for that. She was very good at waiting. The hours moved slowly, the way hours do when the cabin is held in tension, and no one wants to be the first to release it. The crew worked in careful proximity to Sandra's section, close enough to perform their duties, not close enough for extended eye contact. It was a choreography she recognized. She had seen it in boardrooms too, the way people positioned themselves when the social pressure in a room had a clear direction of flow. No one wanted to be caught on the wrong side of the captain's displeasure. She understood it and held it against none of them individually. Systems produced this behavior. Systems had to be the thing that changed. In the window seat, 2 rows ahead, Marcus Webb had his blanket folded across his lap and his phone tucked beneath it. He had reviewed the recording twice already. The audio was clear enough to make out individual words without straining. The ambient noise of the cabin was consistent, the recording uninterrupted. Whatever else happened, that footage existed and it was going to go somewhere. He glanced once at the woman in seat 4B, still eyes closed, hands flat on her thighs, and thought that either she was very composed or very afraid, and he could not entirely tell which. And then he thought maybe those two things were not as different as people assumed. Sandra was not afraid. She was working. With her eyes shut, she walked through the timeline methodically, beginning at the gate. The comment Harmon had made to his crew about transatlantic passengers, vague, deniable, but a patterned start. The briefcase, deliberate, targeted, without cause. The confrontation and racially inflected. Sabine Fleet. The intercom announcement. A weaponization of public address to isolate and shame her. The instruction relayed through Daniel Perry, compliance enforced under threat. The log entries Harmon was presumably making in the cockpit right now. And the threat, law enforcement waiting at Heathrow. She built it like a case, because that was what it was. She had spoken with the London team before boarding, and the final documents were fully prepared. A delay of a few hours could be managed. The meeting could be rescheduled to the afternoon. It was not ideal. It was not catastrophic. She was not going to let him take the deal, and she was not going to let him take her composure. And the order in which she protected those things was very deliberate. Outside the oval window, the sky was beginning to change. The absolute black of mid-Atlantic night was softening at its edges. A deep blue seeping in at the horizon. Not dawn yet, but the suggestion of it. The Irish Sea would be below them somewhere, invisibles under cloud cover, cold and gray and indifferent. The intercom chimed softly. Harmon's voice returned, and it was not the voice of a man who had reconsidered anything. It was the voice of a man who had been waiting 6 hours to say this. Ladies and gentlemen, we have begun our final descent into London Heathrow. Cabin crew, please prepare the cabin for landing. I want to take a moment to thank you for your patience during what has been a challenging flight. For those of you with connections, ground staff will be available to assist you at the gate, and for the passenger currently seated in seat 4B, please remain in your seat after we dock. You will be escorted from the aircraft. He did not say her name. He did not need to. Every head turned one more time. Sandra opened her eyes. She looked out the window at the first gray light spreading across the Irish Sea below, at the texture of the clouds breaking apart as the aircraft descended through them, at the scattered lights of coastal England beginning to appear. She looked at all of it with a steadiness, surprised at even herself. She reached down and retrieved her phone from the seat pocket. He had spent the entire flight constructing a version of events in which he was right, and she was the problem. He had logged it and threatened it and announced it to 200 witnesses. He had been so certain of his own story that he had walked himself to the edge of something irreversible. She was going to let him take one more step, and then she was going to make a single phone call. The landing was smooth. The 777 touched down at Heathrow with barely a shudder, the runway lights strobing past the windows in a blur of amber and white, the engines reversing with a roar that pushed everyone gently forward in their seats before the brakes eased the aircraft to a taxi pace gate. 17. Terminal 3. The plane docked with a gentle thud, and the jet bridge telescoped in. Overhead bins snapped off. Overhead bins snapped open. The normal sounds of arrival filled the cabin, the zip of bags, the rustle of coats, the murmur of people calculating connection times. But a significant number of passengers did not stand. They settled deeper into their seats. They looked toward the front of the business class cabin. They had heard the announcement. They had been watching this for 6 hours. They were going to see how it ended. The aircraft door opened. 2 Metropolitan Police officers in high-visibility vests stepped through, followed by an airport official with a tablet tucked under his arm. They positioned themselves in the forward galley area and waited, their expressions professionally neutral. Then the cockpit door opened. Harmon emerged. He had the look of a man delivering a verdict he had composed and rehearsed. Shoulders back, chin up, the full 30-year carriage of absolute command. He came down the aisle with unhurried authority, made eye contact with the lead officer, and then turned to the business class cabin. His arm came up. He pointed. There she is, officers. Seat 4B. She has been belligerent, non-compliant, and a deliberate disruption to this crew from the moment she boarded. I want a formal report filed, and I want her formally charged with interference with a flight crew. The officers looked at each other for a fraction of a second. Then the taller one moved toward Roe. Approach situations where they experience officers' official account might be only one account. Ma'am, would you mind coming with us? A serious allegation has been made and we need. Sandra did not move, not a shift of weight, not a turn of the head. She held up her phone. Her thumb hovered over a name in her contacts. Then she raised her eyes to Harmon's and looked at him with the full, unshielded attention she had been careful to withhold for the last 7 hours. Captain Harmon, she said. Her voice carried to every person still seated at the cabin. It was not loud, it was simply clear. I am giving you one final opportunity. Retract your statement. Apologize to me and to your crew for your conduct on the flight. That offer is available to you right now. It will not be available to you in 30 seconds. Harmon stared at her. Something moved through his expression, a flicker, a recalculation, quickly suppressed. He had spent 7 hours building this moment. He was not going to give it up now. He laughed, a short, hard sound. Apologize to you. You're in no position to be making any kind of demand. This is still my aircraft, and you are in violation of— Very well, Sandra said. She pressed call. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice brisk and British. Whitfield. James, Sandra said. It's Sandra Mitchell. In the window seat across the aisle, Marcus Webb stopped breathing. Harmon heard the name, just the first name, and his eyes narrowed slightly, the beginnings of some internal search. Sandra, a beat, the warmth of recognition, and then something is in else, the sharpening of attention that happens when something is not right. Not quite, James. I'm on my own aircraft. Apex 714. Docked at your gate 17. The captain, Gerald Harmon, has detained me on board and called law enforcement to have me formally charged with interfering with a flight crew. A silence. And then, as Sandra Mitchell, from the Apex Air Board of Directors, the very same, and that was when it happened. Harmon's face changed, not all at once. First the name, Sandra Mitchell, attaching itself to something in his memory that he'd filed without retrieving. Then the context, Board of Directors, arriving behind it like a second wave. The full phrase assembled itself in his mind the way a sentence does when you read its last words, and suddenly the beginning makes sense. Dr. Sandra Mitchell, Board of Directors, Apex Air, the woman in seat 4B. His face went the color of concrete. His arm, still half raised from the point, dropped to his side. On the phone, James Whitfield was already moving. Stay exactly where you are. I'm pulling up the gate 17 feed right now. Tell the officers on board to stand by. I'm dispatching my senior manager, and I'm getting Apex Corporate Security on the line this instant. Thank you, James, Sandra said. She ended the call. She looked at the 2 police officers who were now looking between her and the captain with the careful recalibration of people who have just understood that the ground has shifted. Sir James Whitfield, Director of Heathrow Operations, is on his way here. He has asked that you stand by. A taller officer spoke quietly into his radio. Captain Gerald Harmon stood very still in the center aisle of his aircraft, and the 30 years of unquestioned command that had carried him to this moment offered him nothing at all. The 10 minutes that followed had the quality of a dream in which all the furniture has been rearranged in the dark. Everything was where you expected it, and nothing was where it belonged. Harmon stood in the aisle, not because anyone had told him to, because his legs had, in some fundamental mechanical sense, forgotten their next instruction. The arrogance that had propelled him through the last 7 hours, the certainty, the righteousness, the clean and simple story he had been telling himself was metabolizing into something he had no category for. Sandra Mitchell, he ran it back, ran everything back. The woman at the gate, the scan he had given her, the reflex assessment that had taken less than a second and that he had not questioned for even one of the hours since. The briefcase he had moved, the way he had stood over her, the things he had said, the intercom announcement, the log entries, the call to the Met. The police officers who were right now standing in his aircraft, having been called by him to arrest a member of his own company's board of directors. Rachel Torres had retreated to the forward galley and was standing with her backs against the wall, her eyes on a point somewhere above the door frame, the professional composure she had maintained for the entire finally beginning to fracture at its edges. Daniel Perry had not returned. Marcus Webb, in his window seat, had his phone pressed flat to his thigh. He was watching Harmon with the particular stillness of someone who understands they have just witnessed something that does not often happen in the visible world. A man standing in the exact moment his life divided into before and after, not knowing yet which side of the line he was standing on. Then the footsteps came down the jet bridge. Fast. Several sets of them. Sir James Whitfield entered the aircraft with the compressed energy of a man who had covered the length of a terminal at something close to a run and was choosing not to show it. He was 50-something, lean, a gray suit that had not expected its mornings. Behind him were two people. Sandra recognized Thomas S. Reed, Apex Air's senior UK executive, shouldered and grim-faced, and Angela Park, head of UK operations, whose expression had the particular quality of someone deciding addressed as angry they were permitted to be. Whitfield addressed the police officers first. Officers, thank you for your time. This situation is an internal matter for Apex Air. I can assure you there is no interference charges here. You can stand down. The taller officer nodded once, and they withdrew to the jet bridge without comment. Whitfield turned to Sandra. He did not perform anything, no grand gesture, no theatrical apology. He just looked at her with the directness of a man who has known her long enough to know she would not want theater. Dr. Mitchell. On behalf of Heathrow Airport, I am genuinely sorry for this welcome. Your car is downstairs and I have cleared your arrival with customs. Please. He gestured toward the door. Sandra stood. She lifted her leather briefcase from the same bin it had been returned to after being dropped on the floor, and settled the strap over her shoulder. She took one step toward the door and then she stopped. She turned to face Gerald Harmon. He had not moved. He was standing in the same position, the same center of the aisle, as though movement might complete something he wasn't ready to complete. His color had not returned. His eyes, when they met hers, held the particular desperation of a man who has found the door to a burning building and cannot reach it. Dr. Mitchell, he began. His voice was different now. Thin, stripped of its authority, oddly small. I had no idea. There's been a misunderstanding here. The stress of the flight. I've been Captain Harmon. Her voice was not raised. It did not need to be. There was no misunderstanding. You understood very clearly that you were speaking to a black woman. And from that single fact, you made a series of assumptions, so automatic you didn't notice you were making them. They assumed I could not afford the seat I was sitting in. You assumed I was angling for compensation. You assumed that your authority entitled you to intimidate me, threaten me with federal charges, and weaponize an entire aircraft full of passengers against me, and that there would be consequences. She paused and let him hold the weight of what came next. The only information you were missing was my job title. And if my job title is the only thing that would have changed any of what you did tonight, then the problem runs considerably deeper than this conversation. Thomas Reed and Angela Park had not spoken. They were standing behind Harmon now, their faces closed, their silence its own kind of verdict. Sandra looked at Thomas Reed. Mr. Reed, Captain Harmon is relieved of duty, effective immediately. His credentials and flight access are to be suspended pending a full internal investigation. I want a preliminary report on my desk before I leave London. Yes, Dr. Mitchell, Reed said. Immediately, without hesitation. She turned toward the jet bridge door. From the window seat, Marcus Webb stood. He stepped into the aisle, holding his phone out toward Thomas Reed. "Excuse me," he said. "I think you might need to see this." I recorded the instant. He pressed play. The audio filled the cabin, clear and unambiguous, Harmon's voice enhanced by the quality of the recording, every syllable precise. "You people are always looking for something to complain about. In seats, you clearly can't frivolous." The threat about restraint. The word, the contempt that had been naked even when he tried to keep it conversational. Angela Park looked at the floor. Thomas Reed closed his eyes for a moment. Gerald Harmon stood in the center of the aisle. He had walked 30 years and listened to himself. Sandra did not stop to watch. She stepped through the door and into the jet bridge without looking back. Whitfield 2 steps behind her, and the door sealed closed behind them with the quiet, definitive click of something that cannot be reopened. The Sterling Airways merger closed at 2:15 in the afternoon, London time, in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city, with 6 lawyers, 4 executives, a set of documents that represented 50 years of aviation security for APEC presented here. Sandra signed her name in space allocated for the Sterling CC, shook hands with the Sterling CEO, and took a car back to her hotel. She slept for 3 hours. Then she opened her laptop. The preliminary report from Thomas Reed was already in her inbox. 12 single-spaced, with attachments. The instant report Harmon had filed, which described Sandra Mitchell as belligerent, agitated, and a clear threat to flight safety. The separate statements from Rachel Torres, Daniel Perry, and First Officer Kyle Bennett, all of which described a passenger who at no point behaved in a threatening or disruptive manner, and a captain who had behaved in ways they found alarming and difficult to manage. Bennett's statement noted that he had strongly advised Harmon against confronting the passenger and had expressed opposition to the diversion threat, advice that had been explicitly overruled. And then, at the bottom of Simhatadlan list, the video file Marcus Webb had provided, 22 minutes and 40 seconds of cabin audio and video, beginning before the meal confrontation and end to the cockpit door closed. Sandra watched it once, start to finish, with her hotel room curtains open and London below her in the rain. She forwarded everything to Apex's legal counsel in New York with a single line of instruction, pursuant to Nathan Blackson hearing. Then she sent a separate text to Nathan Blackwell's office, the CEO, precise and quietly forceful, a man who had not gotten where he was by flinching from difficult decisions. The note said, "We need to talk before this gets to us headline." He called within the hour. 3 days later, in a conference room on the 50th floor of Apex Air's Manhattan headquarters, the hearing convened. The table was long and polished to a mirror. The chairs were leather. The room had the feel of a space designed to communicate that decisions made here were final. Nathan Blackwell sat at one end. Sandra sat to his right. Maria Flores, head of Apex Legal, sat at the far end with a file folder and the expression of a person who has done this before and finds no pleasure in it. Gerald Harmon sat on the other side of the table with Harold Dixon, his union representative. Dixon was a heavy-set man with the tired eyes of someone who had spent his career fighting battles he sometimes believed in and sometimes did not, and who could tell from the thickness of the files across the tables that this was not a fight he was going to win. Nathan Blackwell opened the hearing without ceremony. He read from Harmon's incident report. He noted the discrepancies. He gestured to the screen at the end of the room, and an aide played Marcus Webb's footage at full volume. The audio filled the room. The words filled the room. The silence that followed filled the room. Then Blackwell set down the report and looked at Harmon directly. "Your account claims Dr. Mitchell was belligerent and a potential threat. Your co-pilot's statement contradicts you. Your lead purser's statement contradicts you. Your flight attendant's statement contradicts you. And this footage contradicts you. Every member of your crew, when asked, described a passenger who was composed and professional, and a captain who was not." Harmon leaned forward. His voice had the fragile quality of something that had been held together by will and was now showing its seams. "Nathan, I made a mistake, a catastrophic mistake. In judgment, my wife has been ill. I've been under enormous personal pressure. 30 years of perfect service, 30 years of safety. That has to account for something. Sandra spoke for the first time. She did not raise her voice. Captain Harmon, does your personal stress routine sauce as racial profiling? Because your behavior did not begin with the meal. It began at the gate in New York. Before this aircraft left the ground, you made a disparaging remark about transatlantic passengers. You then removed my luggage from the overhead bin without cause and left it on the floor. You established a pattern of contempt hours before the salmon ever arrived. Harold Dixon cleared his throat. With respect, Dr. Mitchell, Captain Harmon is prepared to issue a formal apology. He's willing to attend sensitivity training, anger management, whatever is required. A man's 30-year career, Maria Flores opened the file, told her. Mr. Dixon, your client left the cockpit during a non-critical phase of flight to confront a passenger over a meal feedback comment. He created a hostile environment for passengers and crew. He filed a false official incident. He threatened to divert an international aircraft under fabricated pretenses. An action that would have cost this company a minimum of $200,000 and triggered a mandatory FAA inquiry. He attempted to use law enforcement as a personal harassment tool. She slid a second document across the table, and our internal review has surfaced 3 prior passenger complaints filed against him over the past 5 years, all describing similar behavior, all from passengers of color. Your client does not have a 30-year He has a 30-year record of not being caught on camera. Harmon stared at the document. The color that had been absent since Heathrow did not return. Dixon put his pen down. Nathan Blackwell stood. He did not raise his voice either. It was a room full of people who had learned that the quieter you spoke, the more carefully people listened. Gerald, whatever this company is, whatever it aspires to be, it is built on a single principle. Every person who steps onto one of our aircraft is to be treated with dignity, not based on their seat assignment, not based on what they look like, not based on what you assume about their bank account. Every person. That is not an aspiration. It is a contract, and it is the only contract that matters. He paused. Your employment with Apex Air is terminated, effective, immediately. Your securities will accompany you to collect your belongings. Your credentials have already been suspended. He sat down. The hearing was closed. Gerald sat across the table from the consequences he had built, brick by brick, a choice in hours before dawn over the Atlantic. The video went online the evening after the hearing. Marcus Webb had uploaded it himself with no commentary, just a title. Captain on Apex Flight 714, JFK to London. 22 minutes of footage. By morning it had 2 million views. By the following afternoon it had 12. CNN picked it up first, then the BBC, then every news cycle that needed a story clean enough to explain in a single sentence and complicated enough to discuss for a week. The clip that circulated most widely was 45 seconds long, the portion in which Harmon said, "You people in the cabin went quiet," and Sandra Mitchell looked at him without expression and asked whether he was finished. The clip was played on television approximately 1,400 times in the 72 hours following Marcus Webb's post, according to account that Apex's communications team ran in something close to despair. Apex Air's stock dipped 3.5% on the first day and recovered partially on the second when the company issued had been a statement confirming that a comprehensive internal review was underway, The public relations team had drafted 4 different versions of the statement. Sandra had reviewed all 4 and sent back a single edit. The word individual was replaced with Captain Gerald Harmon, a 30-year employee, because she had decided that he did not deserve the protection of anonymity when the passengers he had targeted had never had it. For Gerald Harmon, the termination was not an ending. It was a door opening onto a corridor of consequences that stretched further than he had imagined. On the Monday after the hearing, he drove to the Apex Air Crew Operations Center at JFK, a building he had entered hundreds of times with the ease of a man walking into his own home. His access card produced a flat red light. He had to sign in as a visitor. He walked to the crew lockers under the gaze of people who had known him for decades and now looked at the floor when he approached. He packed 30 years into a cardboard box, a few lapel pins, an old flight map he'd kept for sentimental reasons, a photo of himself in his first captain's uniform, barely recognizable in his own face. He carried the box out under the eyes of a generation of pilots who only knew him as the man from the video. The union meeting was worse in some ways. Harold Dixon met him at a diner off the expressway and slid a file across the table without making eye contact. "Rick," he said, and then corrected himself. "Gerald, my hands are tied here. The footage is indefensible. The crew statements are unanimous. First Officer Bent's account describes behavior that constitutes gross insubordination. Apex has you on falsifying an official report, which is a terminable offense on its own. If we contest the firing, they will countersue you personally for litigation costs, and they will win." He paused. "The board voted this morning. We cannot represent you." 30 years of dues, Harmon said. His coffee was getting cold. 30 years of flying the line, and you're cutting me loose because of one flight. Dixon looked up at that. The weariness in his eyes was not unkind, but it was. "We defend pilots who make mistakes in cockpits, Gerald. We can't defend a man who uses the cockpit as a platform to conduct a personal campaign against a passenger. You didn't make a mistake, you made a philosophy, and we're done." The FAA letter arrived 2 months later, certified mail from Oklahoma City. The language was precise and institutional and absolute, citing evidence provided by Apex Air and the agency's independent investigation. The Federal Aviation Administration had determined that his conduct demonstrated a lack of the care, judgment, and responsibility necessary to hold an airline transport pilot certificate. His license was revoked, effective immediately. The document he had built his identity around for 30 years was now voided paper. The pension was next. The termination for cause had nullified its terms. The stocktions unvested dissolved. The house in Connecticut went on the market in March. They sold it for less than it was worth because they needed the transaction to be fast. He and his wife moved into an apartment in Queens. She was managing an illness that his Apex insurance had helped make manageable. Without the insurance, the management got harder. She did not say anything about it directly. She did not need to. From the apartment windows, on clear mornings, he could see the planes on approach to LaGuardia. He could hear them, too. The particular pitch of engines throttling back for landing was a sound he saw inside for 30 years. A sound that had been the signature of everything he had built. Now it was just noise. The people who had suffered under his behavior were, in the same period, being recognized. Rachel to join a new promotion to lead counsel and was invited to join a new crew advisory at Apex. Kyle Bennett was placed on the captain's advancement track. His intervention during Flight 714 Sing. Tess. Held up internally as the standard for co-pilot conduct in conflict situations. A letter from Nathan Blackwell cited his integrity and his courage. The letter went into his permanent file. Daniel Perry requested a transfer to a domestic route. His request was approved without comment, and Marcus Webb, who had simply kept his phone in his hand and let the record speak, was invited by Apex's communications team to participate in a panel discussion on a Q-Tiblian service industry. He declined politely and said that he had only done what any decent person would do. The communications team thanked him and sent him a premium membership upgrade. He used it once. None of this was justice exactly in the sense of the word that implies balance and repair. Some of what had happened could not be repaired. It could only be followed, step by consequential step. Sandra Mitchell came after it. Sandra Mitchell was already building that. In the executive committee meeting 3 weeks after the hearing, Sandra made a single argument, and she made it once. A rotten apple in an otherwise clean barrel is a logistics problem. You remove it and move on. A rotten apple that has been in the barrel for 30 years, producing 3 documented complaints that were absorbed without consequence. All operating inside a culture where the most senior person least specs into to me. The person least like to be questioned. That is not a logistics problem. That is a systemic failure. And systemic failures do not respond to individual removals. They respond to redesign. Nathan Blackwell had spent the weeks the Corsics in a state of sober attention. He had read the 3 prior complaints. He had read Bennett's account of advising Harmon against the confrontation and being overruled without discussion. He had thought about what kind of environment produces a situation which a co-pilot feels he cannot intervene, and a flight attendant feels she cannot escalate. And a lead purser delivers an ultimatum to a passengers because the alternative is too dangerous to consider. He had thought about this for 3 weeks, and he had arrived at the same place Sandra had. Build what you need to build, he said. You have everything you need from this office. The Theta FX Ascent initiative launched 6 weeks later. It was in a seminar. It was not a module appended to annual compliance training. It was a reconstruction. The Harmon incident, anonymized, but not in a way that made it unrecognizable to anyone who had heard the news, became a cornerstone of the new training curriculum. Pilots, flight attendants, ground crews, managers, employees across 27 countries engaged with a program built around real scenarios, real accountability, and the understanding that bias in a service environment is not merely a values problem. It is a safety problem. It creates environments where people are afraid to speak, where hierarchy suppresses information, where a co-pilot does not feel safe telling his captain that what he is doing is wrong. That kind of environment gets people killed in ways that have nothing to do with salmon. The cockpit training modules were the ones Sandra fought hardest for. The old model, captain as final authority in all things, to be deferred to without caveat, was not discarded. It was refined. Authority in a cockpit is real and necessary. The captain must be able to make decisions quickly and have them followed. But authority and infallibility are not the same thing, and a crew resource management program that treats them as synonymous produces Gerald Harmon's. The new model built-in channels for dissent. It graded co-pilots on their willingness to challenge decisions, not after the fact, but in the moment. Rachel Torres was promoted to lead purser ahead of her scheduled review and became the first flight attendant in Apex history to serve on a senior crew advisory council. She sat in meetings where policy was made, and she said what she saw, and she was listened to. She became a mentor to junior cabin crew across 5 international routes. Her name was used in training materials with her petition as an example of integrity under pressure. Kyle Bennett received his captain's evaluation 18 months ahead of schedule. He passed with the highest marks in his testing cohort. His commendation letter cited Flight 714 by date and route, and noted that his conduct under pressure reflected the values Apex was working to institutionalize. The results of the first year came in during what would have been Harmon's final year before retirement, had things gone differently. Internal reports of passenger complaints in premium cabins were down 41%. Satisfaction scores across business class had reached the highest recorded levels in the company's 40-year history. Apex won 3 industry awards: Best Improved Corporate Culture, Excellence in Crew Training, and the International Air Transport Association's Passenger Experience Distinction, which had not previously been awarded to a North American carrier. The company that had been, briefly, a global symbol of exactly the wrong kind of institutional behavior, had become a case study in what change actually looked like when it was treated as more than a public relations exercise. A year after Flight 714, Sandra boarded an Apex flight from JFK to London. She settled into her seat, not 4B this time, but close, and opened the Sterling Airways integration reports, which now required her attention in London approximately once a month. The aircraft pushed back. The engines spooled up. Cock door opened. A young man stepped out. He was perhaps 34, trim and precise in his uniform with a name tag that read J. Carter. He walked directly to her seat with the ease of someone who has decided to do something and is not second-guessing it. Dr. Mitchell. He extended his hand. Captain James Carter. I hope I'm not interrupting. I just wanted to come introduce myself. She shook his hand. Captain Carter, it's good to meet you. I take it we're in good hands today. You are, he said and smiled, and there was nothing performed about it. I was a first officer here when everything happened. The atmosphere, it was difficult in ways I didn't have language for at the time. There was pressure to defer, to not make waves, to treat seniority as a kind of immunity. He paused. After the initiative launched, things changed in ways I didn't expect. The conversations became honest. The training was real. I had a captain on a transatlantic last March tell me he was glad I pushed back on a decision he was about to make wrong. That would not have happened before. He looked at her steadily. You didn't just remove one person, you changed the environment that allowed a person like that to operate. And that's a different thing entirely. It's the more important thing. He paused. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. It's an honor to be flying you today. He returned to the cockpit. Sandra sat for a moment without opening her laptop. She looked at the seat back in front of her, and then out the oval window at the concrete and the gray New York sky and the line of planes on the taxiway ahead of them. Gerald Harmon had paid a steep price for the choices he had made. She held no satisfaction in that, exactly. It was too expensive a lesson for too many people to feel satisfied by. But the captain who had just shaken her hand, the flight attendant, 3 rows forward, reviewing her safety card with genuine attention. The culture that surrounded them both, that was the thing worth measuring. That was the return on the night. She had decided not to be silent. The engines lifted their pitch. The aircraft began to move. The price of prejudice is steep, but the dividend of decency, paid out in people who go home safe, in professionals who do their work with dignity, in systems that hold themselves accountable, compounds in ways that Gerald Harmon, staring at LaGuardia from a queen's apartment, could not afford to calculate. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave us a comment. What would you have done in Sandra's position? If every person deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of who they are or where they're sitting, hit that like button and subscribe. We'll see you next time.